So basically, first I want to say that I identify as trans non-binary. And as far as I like the idea of hearing multiple points of view. And as far as the trans-exclusionary radical feminist perspective is concerned, to be completely transparent, there are aspects of it which I can relate to. That may be due to my religious upbringing, multiple factors. But as far as the trans political movement, I find that there's often a lot of, there's obviously hate going both ways. And the problem that I have, I guess in my mind, is understanding. I apologize. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to word what I want to say. But as far as there being a separation between transgender women and cis women, in my mind, I do see a distinction between the two, not saying that we shouldn't allow trans women to identify as trans women, but trying to understand the nuances of the importance of trans women identifying as cisgendered women. I don't know that necessarily makes sense.
Maybe whether or not trans women are part of the Women's March. Whether trans women belong in the conversation about women's rights and pay equality and these different things. Does that sort of get at the heart of what you're looking at?
Kind of. Yeah, it's getting there. Not necessarily those specific topics, but just obviously everyone has equal voices. But when there is
this space for them
specifically. I'm sorry?
Is this particular space, whether we're talking about the Women's March or any other feminist movement, is there room for trans women in that space? And do they belong there, or do they have their own political activist organizations? These different things, are they welcome? Should they be welcomed into those types of large-scale feminist movements?
Is that making sense?
That's kind of the question that we're poking around the edges of.
Kind of. Again, it's. Obviously, I think they should, and I'm not. I guess maybe that's where the distinction lies. Is that the TERF movement doesn't think that they should. I think it's more about issues that are specifically related to issues that most cisgendered women may deal with that trans women don't deal with.
Periods and such.
I was going to say most of that would just be the biological reproduction. Oh my goodness.
Talk to any trans woman about hormonal shifts, and they're there. They get you.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
but we don't bleed.
I hear that. I remember when Caitlyn Jenner was named, I think, Woman of the Year by maybe Time or some other organization, and there was a lot of pushback. A good friend of mine was really upset, and she kind of went on and on about how this was somebody that didn't have the experience of growing up as a woman, is the way she described it, and so she didn't have all of that oppression and these different things. And we can talk about Caitlyn Jenner as somebody worthy of being the #1 woman of any particular year. That's a separate conversation. But I could not appreciate where she was coming from. In her mind, women were finally starting to make ground. and it felt like it was splitting the party, or it was
being co-opted.
Yeah, being co-opted, or giving men a lot of the attention that women had finally started to garner. And I felt, and I feel, that was just a radical misconceptualization of what and who trans women are, which is, in the simplest terms, women.
I personally, is it okay if I and then go? And you look like you may have been ready to say something.
Please go on.
So I feel like trans women are still women, and their voices matter just as much as any cis woman.
Right.
Not only that, but even if they didn't necessarily have the same experiences as cis women growing up, it's not as if they turned 20, 25, whatever age they actively transitioned or came out as, or what have you, that they started becoming women.
Well, and I'd like to state, too, that there are plenty of trans women who transitioned and got to experience society as a cis woman would, and went, fuck this shit. So that's not to say that trans women do not experience the same, social hardships, I think it's all a matter of perception and a matter of experience. There are plenty of cis women who have not had the same experience as other cis women. Does that make them less of a woman? No. And that does not negate their part in society either. So I think it's... Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's a matter of your perception of the issue.
Dani, before I jump in, I just wanted to ask if you have any more clarification about what you're wondering or what you're asking about, because I don't want to dive into a rant or anything that isn't going to be helpful to you.
Right. I think the sort of the focus of my question is, it seems to me like the trans political movement, and again, I'm talking about on like Twitter, Reddit, etc.
Sure.
It seems like they are striving so hard for equality that there is a bit of drowning out of cisgendered women's perspective. To the like they're striving so hard for equality that anytime that anybody wants to say that there isn't a difference, that they push back so hard, saying no, we are exactly equal.
I hear you.
Okay, yeah, I think I see. There are so many wrongs in the world and in society that we are all trying to climb our way up, and sometimes we climb over each other just to get that one rung higher. I think that's
right.
Is that kind of where you're going with this? Okay.
Yeah, when you're among or when you're witnessing conversation within a marginalized community, you're going to see a lot of sort of in-group thinking, and that's not a bad thing per se. It's pretty normal.
Right.
It's just a normal thing that humans do. And when
it's unfortunate. I don't mean to jump in, but I think it's important to point out the way that gay men treated lesbians for so long.
Oh, yeah.
The way that lesbians and gays contributed to bisexual invisibility for so long. And as we work our way to the acronym, now we're at the T, and we're starting to talk about that experience. And so I feel like that is a unfortunate aspect of humanity as we just get slightly better at taking care of one another. Yeah.
It's just there are so many different things that can make you marginalized.
Sure.
that we're trying to work on all of them at one time, but unfortunately, that's not how races go.
Yeah, there's no oppression Olympics, but yeah, there's in-group thinking, and that's not only normal, that's actually kind of necessary, I find, because it's building a cultural identity for people who didn't have that, for people who initially, without that community, saw themselves as isolated and alone and freakish in many cases, because that's the way that society treated them. And a natural outgrowth of that, unfortunately, is that when you're in those communities and someone will sort of push against the sort of groupthink, there's going to be a backlash. And I'm not sure that I don't think in any way that that's endemic to the trans movement, in as much as there is one, so much as it is just endemic to movements in general. But I get what you're saying, and I've seen the same thing, and I've probably been guilty of it, honestly, because I've certainly, when you have to answer the same questions often enough, it begins to seem kind of like a script, and you're just ready for the next reply, you know?
So, Dani, did that kind of help at all with what you were looking to talk about?
I guess the final point that I would ask is, as someone who kind of sees all of the moving pieces and seeing, you know, well, I think we're pushing a little bit too strongly here. How can I stay balanced as far as, yes, this does, you know, there is injustice here, but at the same time, they have a point, but at the same time not alienating myself from the only community that I, you know, feel a close bond with.
When I want to do that, what I do, and I don't know if this will work for you, but what I do is I phrase my objections as questions. Just always. If I have a differing view, instead of saying, hey, they have a point with this, I'll say, hey, what about this? What do you guys think? And then create a discussion about it in a respectful way, instead of you know, pushing what I think in there. And it's not perfect by any means, and arguments still erupt, but it is, in my experience, much more successful with actually creating conversation and creating dialogue.
That makes sense.
What about you folks?
I mean, the street epistemology.
I should really look that up sometime.
Oh, no, that's basically it, is just asking questions insteed of
the Socratic method,
arguing
way of
so
things
much,
out.
just
I
asking
just
questions.
That myself.
Which gets the other party, rather than getting their defenses up, gets them thinking. So, yeah, I would agree.
That's our 2 cents.
So,
and I think just as a general rule, remembering that people are people, and that anybody who says that they're oppressed is perhaps worth listening to. You know, I mean, there's definitely folks that are just clamoring for the sake of that, or because they no longer are in control. They're complaining about how oppressed they are. But even still, I think that there's a lot of value in at least listening to those folks, rather than just blowing off the, you know, White Lives Matter movements or these different things. Trying to hear where they're coming from, where that fear is located, and having some respect for it, even if their view system is really broken and selfishly motivated.
yeah. So, Dani, did that help at all?
Yeah. I heard street epistemology and Socratic method. I guess, would those be the best things to, as far as like do some research on the finer points of using those methods to engage conversation? Is that a good starting point as far as research is concerned?
I would say yes, because it is a good toolbox for any conversation about any topic. It's just how to have that constructive conversation without putting up barriers. So I would say yes.
Yeah, any form of intentional, therapeutic, nonviolent communication, no matter which terminology we're using to package it in.
Read that book.
We can call it motivational interviewing. We can call it, I mean, it really is going back to Socrates. He said, as somebody who barely understands complex philosophy.
I drank what?
But it is of value to look at those things and to just try to be more kind as we're having these conversations. Any group that is advocating exclusion is usually one that's going to set up a red flag for me. So if the E in your acronym includes excluding other people, particularly people that are thoroughly marginalized, then I think you really need to stop and ask yourselves what the hell you're doing. But as decent and kind humans, we want to try and hear people, no matter how ridiculous, and take what we can from that, try to see their hurts and their fears, and respond as kindly as we can without being pushed over by assholes.
I also try to be kind when people lash out, because it's generally not about me or what I'm talking about. Especially if we're talking about a marginalized group, if I say something and it gets someone's dander up, it's probably just because this person is living with a lot of shit, and it really sucks to be just to be marginalized. It sucks. So I mean, try not to take it personally. And I want to thank you, by the way, for this call.
Yeah,
yes,
we really appreciate you calling in. And, again, we do have a couple of lines open. So as we move on to our next email, we would love to hear from more of you.
Thank you, Dani.
Thank you.
And if you would like to call the show, that number is 512-686-0279. 512-686-0279.
When you say it so hypnotically, it just gets lodged in my memory.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's intentional.